Yeah, let me first give a brief introduction to the speaker today, Kristen Jacks. Kristen Jacks is a financial educator and the founder of Money in Your 20s. Kristen studied financial planning at the Boston University Center for Professional Education. She started her career at Kiplinger's Personal Finance magazine and later worked at the Mutual Fund magazine. Kristen is a graduate of Duke University. Today's program will be recorded and posted on the Greenwich Library's channel on YouTube in a few days. And it will stay there on YouTube. So if you miss today's program, you can always revisit the library's channel on YouTube. Now let me turn the screen to Kristen. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Young, and thanks for joining us, everybody. And a big thank you to Greenwich Library. It's amazing the programming they have, how they want to keep you informed and educated, and it's really, we're just so lucky to have a library like Greenwich. Okay, so today's program is, are you really diversified? And I'm going to start with something visual because we don't want to get bogged down in the math and things like that. Oh, actually, you know what? I take it back. I'm starting with a disclaimer just to protect the library. This webinar is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to provide investment advice. None of the investments mentioned in this discussion group are recommended. Many are not suitable for the average investor. If you plan to invest, you are urged to consult an advisor who is aware of your unique needs and situations. So what we're really trying to say is it's important to be informed and make educated decisions. We're here to educate you, but we're not recommending investments and we're not discouraging investments. So anything that I say here, don't make that, oh, I got to go sell something or I got to go buy something. Just feel more informed. Okay, so this is kind of what people think of when they think of America's favorite investment, right? America's favorite investment is definitely the S&P 500 fund, index, whatever you want to call it, ETF these days. And when people pile into an S&P 500 fund or ETF, they think this is what they're getting, right? I tried to make a very visual representation of all of these wonderful American brands like Kellogg and Walmart and Starbucks and Hershey's and Zoom. We're on Zoom now. You just have to love America, right? And bet on America and bet on these great companies. And this is what people think they get when they invest in an S&P 500 fund. Okay, not really. I wanted something very visual because I didn't want to get bogged down in the math. But the truth is, when you choose America's favorite investment, the S&P 500 fund, this is what you actually get. You get a lot of Apple. You get a lot of Microsoft. You get a lot of, it's called Alphabet now, but what you think of as Google. You get a lot of Amazon. You get a lot of NVIDIA. You get a lot of Facebook, which is now called Meta. A lot of people don't know this. A lot of people did not intend to pile on to a huge bet on information technology, but this is what you get. And you get very, very, very little of America's favorite brands like Kellogg or the Hartford or Zoom or General Motors or Campbell Soup, or you get very little of that. And it's confusing to people. Well, why would that be? And the reason is most people do not understand the concept of a cap-weighted index. And that's what the S&P 500 is almost all of the time, except for the companies that do it differently. So almost all the time when people are piling into an S&P 500 index, this is what they're getting. Okay, so this is a little teaser to just get you interested, like, okay, why is this happening? But let me give you also more broadly the big picture, because I could talk about how to diversify investments for hours. I could write a book about it. It is an enormous topic. It's a vast topic, but we have to drill down to kind of the best use of an hour, especially assuming, that you're not an expert, you're not a fellow professional listening to this. You're really just trying to get like the best guidance I can offer you in an hour. And the best I can do in an hour is definitely teach you how important it is to understand a cap-weighted index. Any investment, where there's lots of, stocks all together, pooled together, might be cap weighted. And if you don't know what that means, you could run into some problems. So the best use of an hour for Are You Really Diversified is to look at what cap weighting means, to look at home country bias, right? So are you really getting a nice broad array of investments, around the globe, or are you just sticking to the United States? Very common for people to just stick to the United States. Are you taking on a lot of company stock and maybe even buying more, and then not really thinking of that as an impact, like where you work? Since you are one of your greatest assets, right? You are an income producing asset, especially based on where you work. And have you really thought about how you as an asset and your income as an asset needs to be part of the consideration set? And what does that mean for the other investments you should be choosing? Then exposure to real estate. A lot of people, when they invest, they just think about stocks. And then, some people who are a little bit more with it think also about bonds, but a lot of people just think about stocks. So maybe you're thinking about stocks and bonds, but then a lot of people don't think about real estate as like, it has to be in there, it has to be mixed in beyond just, their primary residence. Okay, and then we'll cover bonds because sure, why not? We just got to put that in there. And then at the end, we're going to talk about rebalancing, which is this whole concept of once you are well diversified and you have a good philosophy and things are nicely balanced, you have to keep them in balance. So that's what we're going to talk about. That's our best use of an hour. And we're going to go back to the cap weighting. So here's where we were. We were embracing America's favorite investment, the S&P 500 fund, and realizing that it's not equally weighted, right? Like, so, I started out with, everybody thinks they're getting this, right? There's just wonderful equal distribution of all these great brands like Disney and Coca-Cola and Kellogg and Netflix, and everyone's excited, embrace America, embrace our company. It makes perfect sense. The best companies just pile in your money. And then people are surprised, to find out this is what they really get, because the index, very often, almost all the time, unless you select otherwise, the S&P 500 fund that you're in is going to be cap weighted. So what does this mean? Why am I getting so much Apple and so much Meta, otherwise known as Facebook, and Nvidia and Microsoft, and it's also getting Berkshire Hathaway, but everybody just knows that as Warren Buffett's, investment vehicle. So I just put his picture in there. But why are you getting so much of that and so little of everything else that you might have been excited about, like Zoom and Target and the Hartford and FedEx and things like that? Okay, so in order to understand this, you have to understand market capitalization. And in fact, to be a good investor, you have to understand market capitalization. If you don't understand market capitalization, do not buy another investment until you do. So here's what market capitalization is. So you have a stock, right? And the value, how the market values the company, is that you look at the share price of the stock, which is changing during the day, right? Monday through Friday, when the market's open, the stock price is moving around. But right now it's after hours, everything's kind of frozen. So whatever the share price was at the end of the day today, that's the price. And then you look at the number of shares that are outstanding. So the shares out in the market times the price of each share. And then that'll give you a number, and that'll give you a market capitalization, a market value, all right? So market values are all over the place. You have the most enormous company in America, I think the world, Apple, okay? $2.8 trillion, that's its value, its market value, okay? Then you have tiny companies like Build-A-Bear, which is an adorable company, right? I love Build-A-Bear. So if you walk through the mall recently and you see how it makes those kids so happy to go in there and select their bear and select the bear's outfit and all their stuff and make the bear right there, like that's a fabulous company. But it is so small, and this starts to get tricky. Apple is so big and people are not used to dealing with big numbers like in the trillions. And Build-A-Bear is so small that when you go to compare them, you think, okay, now wait a second. Is this saying that you could have 9,000 Build-A-Bear size companies for the equivalent of one Apple? Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's how much of a staggering range we have in market capitalizations. That's how big Apple is. And you get down to these small companies like Build-A-Bear that are still public, and they're tiny in comparison. And then you have all different sizes in between. Kellogg is, terrific company, only 24 billion. That seems like nothing compared to Apple, but it's a nice, thriving, American brand with a good dividend. Okay, so hopefully you're getting an idea now that we have all these companies, they all have different values, and let's just drill down to the specifics, right? So how did Apple get this $2.8 trillion value? Well, its recent share price, I did this slide yesterday, so this is based on yesterday's numbers. So its share price intraday yesterday was $173.50. And get this, how many Apple shares are outstanding? 15 billion, so 15,730,000,000 shares of Apple are out in the world. And each share cost $173.50. So you multiply the two of them, and that's how you get $2.8 trillion. This is staggering to me. It's mind-boggling. I always have to open an Excel spreadsheet and really make the columns really large and put in the numbers and be like, am I doing this right? Because this doesn't even seem correct, but it is. That's what you get if you have 15,730,000,000 shares outstanding and you multiply one Apple share price by it. That's what you get, the 2.8 trillion. And then on the other side, we have our nice little tiny company, Build-A-Bear, that has, as of yesterday, the share price was $21.70, and there are 150 million shares outstanding, and that's how we got to the 324 million number. Okay, so you don't have to do any of this yourself. You can just go on any stock screen. I like Yahoo Finance, and they'll just tell you what the market cap is. So you don't have to figure this out for yourself, but you'll get some sense, you go on the stock screen, it always mentions the market cap and it's sitting right there, and there you go. So, don't feel like you have to be pulling out a calculator, or you even have to look up how many shares are outstanding and things like that. So a typical stock screen will just tell you the market value, the market cap of a company. And because a lot of mutual funds, a lot of index funds, ETFs that are based on indexes are cap weighted, this is what happens, that the index itself holds more of the larger valued companies. And it's a really tricky concept because maybe this isn't what you were expecting. I mean, maybe you don't want to be making such a big bet on Microsoft and Apple and Berkshire Hathaway. And by the way, Berkshire Hathaway owns a lot of Apple. So it's a little crazy there with really piling into the Apple story. So, you thought you were maybe getting an even distribution of all these great American brands, but you're not. You're getting a lot of some companies because these indices favor the larger companies. And then they have very little of the smaller companies. It's kind of surprising, but it's true. So the first thing you have to ask yourself about being diversified is, was this what I was expecting? And is that really what, maybe I want to tilt my investments more toward those other companies, maybe I don't want to be so heavily into information technology. I mean, for me personally, technology always breaks around me. I'm not very comfortable with technology. So it was definitely a concern of mine. And definitely, if you have any questions, if anyone can unmute themselves at any time. I'll kind of pause and you can ask a question, or you're welcome to put any question in the chat and I will stop and take questions. And we'll always do questions at the end. But if this isn't hitting, let me know. But does anybody want to ask a question right now, or just put something in the chat? Okay, so another thing to keep in mind, because of the way this S&P 500 fund, which is America's favorite investment, the way this is working is right now it's a dividend disaster. So a lot of people, would love to have it work more like this, right? Because a lot of these companies pay really nice dividends, and a lot of people want, they really see the value of getting a regular dividend as part of their investing. So in the current environment, which is very different than a long time ago. And a long time ago, you would have, I mean, if you go back to like the 1980s, a lot of these big companies in the index were oil and gas companies that pay good dividends. So people used to get a lot of dividend income just by being in an S&P 500 fund. That's not true today because the information technology companies don't pay dividends. So, or very little. I mean, I guess Apple is at 1% or something like that. So in any case, here you are not getting a good dividend. You're not getting a wide selection of American companies like fully like what you expected. So that's something you have to know. Am I really diversified? Am I really getting what I wanted? Now, some people out there knowing the story of how the index funds came to be, how the S&P 500 fund came to be, some people out there, if they, read, they love John Bogle, who is the father of the index fund. They've read Burton Malkiel, Charlie Ellis. They follow Warren Buffett. I mean, they've heard over and over again that the S&P 500 is the way to go. And John Bogle is certainly like to be admired. He's a hero in my book. So, I'm Kristen Jacks. Who do I think I am? Saying anything negative about the S&P 500. That's not what I'm trying to do. But I would like you to consider that the S&P 500, the index fund in general, came about because John Bogle and a lot of other people could see at the time that they brought these products to market, and then other people promoted these products, that the little guy was really getting, a bad deal from Wall Street. The commission structures were astronomical. I couldn't believe it when I first started researching these products, that back in the 70s, you might pay as high as 9%, a commission of 9% to go into any kind of fund. Right at the beginning, they take 9% of whatever money you're putting into an investment. They might take 9% of it just for themselves. That's how bad the commissions were, right? And in the 70s, the stock market wasn't doing well. So John Bogle, great guy, really a caring person, went to Princeton, always worked in the industry. He did not feel comfortable with how the little guy was being treated. And it really irked him. It made him feel like something's got to be done. It's our job to help these people, not harm these people. So he started, and he saw all other kinds of abuses, right? So when brokers would kind of buy and sell things that he, I think he would say it was called churn. Today we call it churn. Kind of doing that unnecessarily, again, to just generate fees. And then that would trigger tax consequences. Well, back then we had pensions. We didn't really have 401ks where all the activity inside the 401k is protected from taxes. You're not going to pay taxes in that year. So you're having a tax consequence from a buyer, from buying or selling. So anyway, all of these problems in the 1970s had to be solved. And the index fund was a wonderful way to solve this problem, to get away from the high fees, to get away from the brokers, buying and selling and causing all sorts of horrible tax consequences and charging fees that were too high. So, it was a terrific product. And today it's still a good product, but you have to understand what you're getting. And I don't think if John Bogle were alive today that he'd be that comfortable with how the cap weighting system has played out to make certain companies just such big parts of these investments. Especially for me, I mean, knowing that Facebook lost half its value, not that long ago. I think it was just this past summer, or maybe a little earlier than that. But all of a sudden, even these, darling companies can just get destroyed very quickly. It makes me nervous to know that the S&P 500 funds are not as diversified as people think. So I'm not trying to insult anyone. John Bogle is a hero in my book. Burton Malkiel, Charlie Ellis, all these guys, when they were saying you have to be, this is what you should do and don't do anything else, they had good reasons to say that. You just need to know what you're getting today because of how cap weighting works. Okay, so that's the whole thing with cap weighting. And it's not just the S&P 500. Very often, any index you choose will, any investment that's based on an index will most likely be cap weighted. It's more likely to be cap weighted than not. So just keep that in mind. And, how are you going to solve that problem? Well, I don't like to mention specific investments, but knowing that that is a problem, there are solutions, right? So you can find out about index funds that are not cap weighted. You could sort of bypass the whole problem of so there's the S&P 500 where it's so top heavy with these really large companies. But if you just bought the S&P 400 and you kind of bypass the first 100 companies, you'd have a more equal distribution. There are ways to get a more equal distribution. And I would think the S&P 400 would also be more dividend friendly. I should check that actually. Okay, so let's move on to our next issue with being diversified in your investments, and that is the home country bias, which is just what it sounds like. It's so typical, especially for Americans, to be thinking, I don't need to do much beyond, the great brands that exist in my country. I mean, I can see that we have great brands, for heaven's sakes, we have great brands, great companies, and these companies are international. So a lot of people think, I don't have to go there. Like these companies are the big brands globally. So I am diversified. Well, okay, that's fine. But let's just take a look at the top performing stock markets around the globe. It's just worth pausing. It's worth remembering, right? It's not always the United States hitting a slam dunk, right? Sometimes it's Israel. Sometimes it's the United Kingdom. Sometimes it's Austria. I mean, there are these thriving other places that have companies, that have things that you can invest in. And it's worth a pause to just say, hey, maybe some part of my portfolio, and various experts pick a different number, right? I mean, you see like 15% of all of your assets should be, international. That's one I see all the time. But, think about it. You're right that, that our wonderful American brands are global. Certainly Apple, which people inadvertently own so much of, is global. But it's worth a look. It's worth remembering about this huge, Canada, our northern neighbor, it's like a huge stock market. I wouldn't do that right now because Canada's really overexposed to banks. Canada, I think banks might be their number one industry. So definitely not recommending that right now, but always worth thinking about these other places. And even just thinking about all of the brands from other countries that touch our lives every day, right? Certainly like a Toyota or a Shell, you're just going to see that every day. GlaxoSmithKline, like phenomenal products, and Siemens, a German company. They're really cutting edge. Especially if you care about technology in the future and things like that. These things are worth a look, and not everything has to be the United States. So I would say you're not fully diversified unless you have some piece that's outward looking to places outside of the United States. Now, if you're going to go international, it's really hard to do that on your own. I certainly wouldn't buy individual stocks from foreign countries. This is definitely where your mutual fund idea is very helpful. And because it's very research intensive, it's one of the few places where if you're looking at mutual funds that can give you international exposure, mutual funds that are buying stocks of foreign companies, then you can pay a 1%, maximum 1%, but you can get up to like a 1% fee in your mutual fund. Everyone today is told keep the fees as low as possible. Don't accept any high fees. I've heard amazing things people who say that even 1/10 of 1% is too much of a fee. And I get that. And that's certainly true for a product that is so obvious, like the S&P 500. It's a commodity at this point, do not pay more. But when you're really trying to get smart advice on, smart choices about foreign stocks, that's going to cost the fund company resources, and they're going to have to pass that cost on to you. So it's one of the few areas where you can look at your mutual fund fees and be okay if they're up to 1%, but not more than 1%. I really don't think it could possibly be justified. Okay, overweighting your job or industry. So this is where we get into you as human capital, you as an asset, you as an income stream. So whatever industry you work in, you need to slow down and think about your making a bet. Your career is like making a bet about that industry, and you don't want to overweight that bet. It's making a bet about a company, and it's making a bet about an industry. If you work for, a publicly traded company. I mean, if you're a teacher at a school, then it's completely irrelevant. So let's take a look. Okay, so John Campbell, smart guy at Harvard, an econ professor, he has this advice, which is I like to use him because he kind of mimics a lot of things you hear here and there from, like, the best books or the best articles, but he's got these 3 pieces, right? So if you are working for a publicly traded company and they are giving you stock, okay, sometimes it's some kind of a stock award, or maybe you just happen to like your company, so you buy it yourself. You really have to limit that, because your career alone is already a huge bet on the company. I mean, obviously, if they give you the stock, you're going to take it, and there's going to be a vesting schedule and things like that, so you can't necessarily sell it. But just beware, be wary. Don't pile on in your company stock, because your career is already, your employment is already a huge bet on that company. So you want to diversify out of that bet. You also have to think about what industry you're in. And I think I've got another slide that kind of makes this. Okay, so if we go back to America's favorite investment, the S&P 500 fund, what is happening currently, because it's now, again, it's market cap weighted. So it's not evenly distributed among all of these different sectors. It's not like evenly distributed between, like, the consumer brands and healthcare and technology and, raw materials like aluminum and things like that. It's not evenly distributed. So, for example, if you're already working in the technology space and your only investment is an S&P 500 fund, you are not diversified, because your career is already in the technology space. That's a big bet on the technology space. And the S&P 500 fund right now is 26.1% of, it's incredibly tilted toward information technology because of the companies that are in the S&P 500 fund that are, it's market cap weighted. So again, it's going to be tilted towards those technology companies. So now you have too much of a bet on technology. If you happen to be working in technology and what you own is the S&P 500, you have to diversify out, okay? Same thing right now if you're in healthcare, because S&P is overweighted to healthcare, and if you're in the financial industry. These are just things to think about. You're going to have to, if you really want to be truly diversified, you should really think about, I don't want to be so heavy, only holding, an S&P 500 fund if I have a career in any of these 3. Okay, I hope that makes sense. All right, exposure to real estate. So stocks, people get it. Bonds, okay, maybe you get it. A lot of people don't get the importance of real estate, and they're surprised. And we did an entire webinar about this, and I thought it was one of the best ones we ever did, because we had 3 brilliant guest speakers. But in that webinar, so we had me and then 3 guest speakers. In that webinar, I started with this, this wonderful guy, David Swenson, who ran the Yale Endowment for years. He had a remarkable track record, remarkable success. He's since passed away. And he kind of surprised people with this bold strategy of saying that your portfolio, or I mean, he was talking about the Yale endowment, but then he later wrote books for the typical investor. And he's like, you have to be 20% real estate. I mean, that was his claim. And that was a surprise. That was a real surprise. But you know, when you look at his track record, I mean, that's how he was making a lot of money, was making bets on real estate and not just relying on stocks and bonds. So the tricky part is, I mean, you know, once investing in real estate became sort of an obvious choice, then all of these real estate investment trusts that are publicly traded, they're easily traded, you know, they became more and more popular. So people thought, okay, got it. If I'm going to do real estate, I'm going to buy into one or more of these real estate investment trusts. And if this doesn't make sense to you, you definitely have to watch the webinar. Actually, I'll toggle ahead to that. So on YouTube, these webinars live on Greenwich Library, the Greenwich Library location on YouTube. And the way to find it is, I mean, I guess if you go to YouTube, you Google Greenwich Library, right? And you get to the Greenwich Library page. And then when you see videos, just go straight to the part that says videos. And then you scroll. I mean, usually it only shows you 5 videos at a time, but you scroll and you will find every one of our webinars is on the YouTube. And the real estate investing one was really interesting because a lot of people, they think real estate, they think just their primary residence. But there are so many opportunities in real estate, whether it's public storage facilities, right? Or even, you know, if you're aware of like how many assisted living places we have now, and that's kind of considered a real estate bet of like buying into the assisted living space field, or even something like cell towers. You know, if you believe because of all the phone usage, you know, I want to make a bet on cell towers. I mean, real estate is really kind of a fascinating and vast area, and that webinar explained all of it. So if you buy the assumption that you should be more in real estate, then I definitely encourage you to watch that webinar. And then in that webinar, we go over the fact that just buying into real estate investment trusts aren't solving your problem because you're trying to get diversified. You want diversification. And for a variety of reasons, it's really unfortunate now. If we look at this chart, I know your eyes might glaze over, but this is a chart that shows a bunch of different real estate investment trusts just compared to the S&P 500. And what you see is they mimic the movements of the S&P 500. So you're not getting diversification. That diversification, you know, happens when, you know, something acts differently than, you know, like if all the stocks move exactly the same, who cares if you own 500 of them? I mean, it's this, you want some difference in what's going up and what's going down. And it's very troubling to see these real estate investment trusts behaving just like the S&P, moving when the S&P goes up, they go up. When the S&P goes down, they go down. So you're not really getting the diversification. So you have to get more sophisticated. It's not just as easy as buying into the real estate investment trust. So I definitely say recommend watching that webinar, because then that'll give you the other ideas. But David Swenson at Yale, you know, what he's saying is, you know, you have to be in real estate. But if you're going to do it, you got to be careful. You don't want to just listen to like what's been the hot thing. You don't want to chase returns, and you don't want to sell in a panic because real estate can go up and down just like everything else. And you have to be ready to sort of forfeit liquidity, because the real opportunities where the diversification is going to help and your investment in real estate isn't going to act just like an S&P 500 fund and move the same way that an S&P 500 fund does, is you probably have to forfeit some liquidity. So you have to park your money somewhere and not be able to like get it out right away. So, you know, kind of weighty, kind of serious, but this is what the experts say. Okay, hopefully you guys understood that. And again, on YouTube, Greenwich Library has a whole section on YouTube, and that's where this webinar on investing in real estate lives. And I really think it's one of the best ones we did because of the guest speakers were fantastic. We had a contractor, a lawyer, a mortgage specialist. It was really great. Okay, so bonds. You know, we had a pretty terrible year, a really catastrophic year last year with bonds. So if you have a recency bias, you probably don't want to hear about bonds. They seemed very painful. And they were, because when interest rates rise, bond prices fall. So if you were sitting on some bonds and we had this incredible jump in interest rates, then you lost money, no question. It was a catastrophe. However, now that interest rates are higher, bonds are looking very attractive to people, right? Especially government bonds or government treasuries, you know, things guaranteed by the government, sold by the government. You can get 5% on your money, and that's better usually than even with bank accounts becoming, bank savings accounts and CDs becoming much better, much more aggressive. You really can't beat what the government's offering. So bonds, I think, you know, there's an argument to be made that bonds definitely belong in a portfolio, even if you got burned last year. And the tricky part is bonds are not, they are not equal. They are not universally the same. And people have an overly simplistic view of bonds. And then because of like a 40-year bull market in bonds, they tend to think that bonds are a good investment or they're safe. And so it really makes me wary. Like you need to be exposed to bonds, but you got to be careful. You have to know how to select them. So again, I would say, please go and watch The Myth That Bonds Are Safe, which was another one of our webinars that we did. It was very well attended, probably by all the people who got burned last year, wanting to know what the heck happened. How did I lose all that money in bonds? Where we really walk through what makes a bond safe and what are you getting yourself into. And if you don't understand the relationship of interest rates to the price of bonds, you definitely have to watch this video, because the people who were surprised that they lost money in bonds, they should not have been surprised, because when interest rates go up, bond prices fall. And there was plenty of warning that interest rates were going to go up. So sometimes just not understanding the mechanics is really a problem. But then even after that, there are all different types of bonds out there of all different quality. And you know, they're called junk bonds for a reason. So you got to really understand rating agencies, you know, how, you know, whether a bond is safe or not, maturities are all different things to understand if you're going to weigh into bonds. So definitely take the time to watch The Myth That Bonds Are Safe. And again, it's just on YouTube on the library section. Okay. So finally, once you've you take all of this in and you develop your own philosophy, and maybe you have been convinced to rotate some money out of an S&P 500 fund, and maybe you are going to go international, and maybe now you start to see that some bonds are not only attractively priced, but super safe. And you can hold, you know, whatever you have until maturity and not have to sell it, which is one of the ways you lose money, is having to sell, you know, in a panic. And you've got your whole real estate thing, figured out. So you've developed a philosophy. You have a philosophy for, I'm going to be a well-diversified investor by being in real estate, being international, you know, maybe solving some of this cap-weighted issue, having some bonds, and you figure something out, right? So you have a plan, you have a philosophy, and you start to implement that plan. Well, over time, you know, certain assets, certain investments do well, while certain investments maybe don't do so well. Nobody can predict the future, right? Obviously, if we could, everybody would pile into the thing that we know is going to work the best and avoid the thing that ends up working the worst. But every year, at the end of every year, there's something that worked really well. And then they're all, you know, just you go from the best to the worst, and there's quite a range, and nobody knows what it's going to be. But whatever you started out with, whatever was your allocation of money to different asset classes, it's going to change, because over the course of time, one of those asset classes will probably get better and better, and one will get worse. And so you end up with a situation And it doesn't even matter what it is. I'm just using percentages here. I just started out with everything being equal, right? So, and I'm not recommending this. I'm definitely not recommending this. I don't know anybody who would recommend be 25% of everything, 25% of bonds, 25% of real estate, 25% of international, and 25% of, domestic, but not the S&P 500 cap weighted. But this is just an example of like, if somebody has a plan and then the impact of time on that plan, because over time, something's going to do worse. So we have this one quadrant here that shrunk from 25% to 18%, and something's going to do much better. So we have another quadrant that expanded from 25% to 30%, right? The other two stayed pretty close to the same. But if you believe in your philosophy, if you believed in where you started, then, not every year. I mean, some people will say you should do it every year, but it's not even necessary to do it every year. But look back at your investments, and over time, as some have gotten heavier and some have gotten lighter, you just rebalance back, which would mean, so for example, say the 30% one, say that was stocks and domestic stocks, local, US stocks. And you decided, well, I don't want to have that much exposure. So I'm going to sell out of some of that. And I'm going to buy into the area that did the worst. And, say that was real estate. Well, I'm going to boost that because I want to get back to my original philosophy, right? So that's what rebalancing is. As long as you agree that you're sticking with your original plan and you liked the balance of your original plan, then you're going to take the time to see how it got out of whack. And then you're going to sell some of your winners and divert that money to your biggest loser. You're just going to get back to your original plan. So I hope that makes sense. So that's what rebalancing is. Okay, here. So we covered the impact of the cap weighting. We covered, the home country bias and really thinking about being diversified to foreign companies. We covered career. You've got to think about the career space that you're in and whether or not your other investments are now making you too concentrated in a certain industry, right? Or even a certain company, if you work for a certain company. I mean, if you work for Apple, if you work for Apple, do not own the S&P 500 fund. I mean, please, heaven to Betsy, like that's just too much Apple. But hopefully you guys understand what I mean. And then we talked about your exposure to real estate and we talked about bonds. And in both of those instances, I'm just urging you to go back to the library, to the website.
Percentage of exposure.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you say that again? Did you ask a question? I thought I heard you ask a question.
My question was, if you all own index funds of mid cap and small cap, as well as large cap, is that one pathway toward diversification just in the stock area? I like your suggestion about the 400 instead of the 500, but I just wanted to ask you that question.
That absolutely. And absolutely. So then you just have to kind of figure out like how much money are you putting, to these different things? I mean, some people would say like, so you have a mid cap and a small cap, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and there's, I would never give any specific advice, but yes, you have solved the problem. But you haven't solved the problem necessarily if you are 90% cap weighted S&P 500 and only 5% mid cap and 5% small cap. Like then I would say, well, I don't know how much you own, but in theory, if you're diverting dollars away from the S&P 500 toward mid cap and small cap, that is definitely a good solution. Good question. Any other questions out there? It's great to hear live human beings. I do too much talking. All right, well, if you think of anything, you can put the question in the chat. And also, I always give my email at the end, so you can reach out to me if you need to. Did you have another question?
Do most of the big companies, like let's say Vanguard, offer a 400 index?
Oh yeah, the big ones. Oh yeah, yeah. The Schwabs, the Fidelities, the Vanguards, they all do. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so we're moving on. We did the rebalancing. Then I always, we have to plug the next webinar, which is all about cryptocurrency. So this should be interesting. We have to talk about it. It's the elephant in the room, and that's our last webinar discussion group before we break for the summer. And then the investing discussion group is starting up again next September. And we definitely want feedback in, whatever you guys want us to cover. We plan over the summer.
Kristen Jacks.
Oh, sorry, what?
No, nothing, sorry.
Okay, over the summer, so Young Wong, who introduced the program this evening, she and I over the summer, we plan everything for next year. And we really want to hear from you guys. I mean, what topics are you really interested in? If you actually went through the whole series, what was your favorite? What could we just forget about? What interests you? So next month is our last one for this series until we break for the summer, and it's about cryptocurrencies. And then if you want to email me or email Young, so you might have Young's email from when you registered, to tell us what you want to hear about. We really want to know what to cover next year. We had some great topics this year. I think, what your financial advisor isn't telling you, that was a big hit. The myth that bonds are safe, people really loved that. So if you want us to repeat something that we did last year and delve into it, please participate in that. I'm just going to take a quick look at this chat.
Hi, can I add something?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm really glad we have been doing this. This is our first year to do this investment discussion group. I discussed with Kristen about our plan for next year. So we are thinking about we can make this discussion group as a book discussion group. That's what the library does. So our plan is to pick a few books about investment. And we're going to make the list in summer and publish on our website. And then Kristen will talk about it. We would like you to read these books. The library will have, multiple copies. So you borrow the books, you read, and also Kristen will talk about the book. So we will spend 2 sessions on one book, and we will, and also if we can also add some topics like what we're doing this year. So I would like to hear from you what you want to be, included in this program, what you want to hear from us. So please email me. I put my email address in the chat box, ywang@greenwichlibrary.org. Email me, let me know what you want to learn from this program and how you want it to be next year. So our plan next
keep
year,
in mind, like Young, obviously we're talking about investment books. It's all nonfiction, but some investment books are super cool, like The Bond King, right? So Bill Gross, who, he just revolutionized the entire bond world. To read about him and his rise to being super wealthy, super powerful, then you're also getting all of the changes in the bond world, all of the innovation in the bond world. And then you can have a great discussion about the pros and cons of bonds today. So it's thoroughly investment based. And so the more we understand about what you want to hear about stocks and bonds and cryptocurrencies and cash and all these things, or even like The Psychology of Money, it's another great kind of bestseller of really getting into the behavioral side of why people select what they select. So, we would love to hear what you want to know about. And so that's great.
I have a question or a suggestion. So for example, the real estate segment that you categorized, you threw out two products that I never would have thought of being in that, which was cell towers and assisted living companies. So I just would have no idea where to begin with that. And I know this was an overview, but perhaps there's interest in some specifics.
Right, and that's why, so we did a webinar on that. And in the webinar, we drilled down into all of these companies, these really fascinating companies where you can, they are picking those investments. And these are private investment companies, and they are picking those investments, and you partner with them. But it's not a REIT, so it's not a publicly traded entity, which is again why you have to forfeit the liquidity. But and if that's stuff that you're interested in, I think we should definitely have something real estate based next year that really, really gets into that. I mean, I was fascinated. I didn't realize that you can change the custodian on your IRA and get a checkbook. And from your IRA, you can have a checkbook and write checks for these kinds of real estate investments, so that you're taking your IRA and you're investing in real estate with money from your IRA. Like, I've been doing this for years. I mean, I'm like a financial literacy specialist, and I had never heard of this before. So there's a lot that goes on for people if they have a lot of money saved in their IRA. If and this is totally legal and it's completely true, that they can start investing in private real estate deals with their own IRA funds. And people don't know that, because certainly Schwab and Fidelity and Vanguard are not going to advertise that, because they don't want to lose your dollars. That's how they make their money. So it's a totally different universe of financial custodians that allow you to do real estate deals using money from your IRA. And that's all in that webinar. But if you're saying that you want to know more about real estate at this like really interesting level, then we can definitely do that next year.
Yeah, email me those, the topics you want to know. So maybe we can cover in the next session or the next year's program. We can, so we can know what to tell you, to give you. Email me or email Kristen. Either way.
So Young's email is in the chat. It's it's pronounced Young, so it's
Young, yeah, Young Wang.
But it's WANG, so YWANG@greenwichlibrary.org.
And Kristen, about using your IRA money for real estate, I do have a friend. He told me you can do it. You first have to form a company, and then use this money to buy rental properties. And he did buy them. He did bought a few, condos,
it's fascinating.
Family properties in Greenwich. And he said all the income, all the gains, the money should go back to your IRA account.
Yes. Yes,
but
if you think about like how poorly the stock market has done, that for people who don't know that they could have used their own IRA money to participate in purchasing a rental property, and then that rental property is throwing off rent and rents are going up. And so maybe they'd have a much better return. But the thing is, it has to remain totally separate. You can never live in that rental property. You have to, whatever gains you make have to go back into your IRA. Otherwise, it's considered like, one of those penalty withdrawals. So it's fascinating. It's in the webinar. So again, and that webinar lives on YouTube. But that's, if you guys like that topic, then we can go deeper into it and really get into it next year. So we'd love to know.
So email us what you want to hear from us. What you want to hear from Kristen, not from me. And next year, we'll also show you our database, our library database for investment. We'll teach you how to use it.
So I think I don't see any, let me look again. I don't see any more questions in the chat specific to making sure you're diversified in your investments. But here's my email, kjacks@moneyinyour20s.com. And by the way, if you have a niece or nephew or grandchild or friend or whatever who's graduating from college, Money in Your 20s, there are 3 copies at the library. So make sure they're getting a good start, or maybe you could read it and just give them the highlights. But a lot of young people have no idea the 5 taxes that are going to come out of their paycheck to make their income much smaller. And we make the classic mistake of overspending based on hearing a number like, I'm going to make $60,000, so I'm rich. And they really don't understand. They can't drill down to what that's going to mean to on month-to-month basis. So my book is all about practical, like, let's show you the salary, and then let's show you a sample budget, and you'll see it doesn't stretch as far as you thought. You have to understand the taxes, and then also stuff like, you know, what really moves your credit score, or do you even know you have a credit score, and things like that. So I'm Jacks at moneyinyour20s.com. If you have any questions about tonight, or you want to tell me what you're looking for next year. And yeah, it's been great. And if you have a question, I mean, we have a minute or two left, you can just put one in the chat. All right, Young, I think we should call it.
Okay, then we'll see you in June. That's the last session for this year. No, we only do 10 sessions. So summer, we take July and August off.
Right.
So that's June 13.
So definitely register for Do Cryptocurrencies Belong in Your Portfolio, June 13th. And hopefully we'll see you then.
Okay, I'll see you next month. Thank you, Kristen, and thank you everyone for attending.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks so much.
That was great.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.